Life. Right now, come here, you. Turn on squad, you. Up, up.
Welcome back for another episode of Life as We Know It podcast. Today, we will be discussing how voting ties into everything from healthcare to insurance to your education, your ability to buy a house, and even the Black maternal health crisis. Stay tuned.
So my name is Tamar Burke, and I'm a public health graduate student at Morgan State University. Today I'm joined by Dr. Kendra Gillespie, Ramin Burke, Alicia Bryan, Andre Anglin, and Leila Thompson. Today we're going to be talking about social determinants of health, which are conditions in the environment which people are born, live, learn, work, play, worship, age that affect a wide range of health functioning and quality of life outcomes. Social determinants of health affect the Black community in many ways, none more prominent than maternity mortality. So Dr. Kendra, my first question to you is, what is referred to as maternal health and why is it so important?
Yeah, so maternal health it's more or less what the term sounds like. So it's the health of a woman as it pertains to her role in becoming a mother. So during pregnancy refers to the maternal health of a woman during her pregnancy as well as afterwards. And some would even argue a little bit beforehand, just because the health of a woman, particularly in the months leading up to a pregnancy and years, can impact the course of her pregnancy. So the overall health of a woman as it relates to the role of carrying a child. It is important, I think, for a couple of reasons, but primarily one, it reflects the health, the economic health, and the health of a healthcare system of a nation in general. There will always be women will always be having babies. And so how a healthcare system is able to provide and care for those women, I think is an indicator of how well that nation is doing. And then for families in general, it's just a critical time point in their lives where things are going to change drastically for the woman, for the family, whether or not, unfortunately, there are some bad outcomes, but whether or not the outcome is good or bad, it's going to impact that family in a huge number of ways.
So the CDC reported that 700 women die every day from preventable causes related to pregnancy and childbirth. Why is that number so high, and how can it be avoided?
Yeah, so there are public health experts on here that will be able to describe this better than I can, but typically when we address maternal mortality, we do it by looking at the MMR, with the maternal mortality ratio. So yeah, the CDC does comment on 700 women dying daily, but particularly MMR, which is the number of deaths per 100,000 live births in the US, is 17. And that number is still high comparatively, like relative to Canada, or looking at Canada, their number is even less than half of that. So it's kind of embarrassing as a developed nation for our MMR to be that high. The question of why it's that high, we'd have to first look at the causes of maternal mortality. So one of the leading things is hemorrhage or too much bleeding. Another big player is hypertensive disorders. So what we refer to as preeclampsia, or anything on that spectrum, which is high blood pressure in pregnancy. So those are some of the things that we can target in terms of trying to reduce those numbers. And over the years, we have actually started to address those things a little bit better. And an increasing portion or an increasing contributor are comorbidities. So women who have medical conditions before pregnancy, that is becoming a role. It's becoming more common for women who are getting pregnant because women are getting pregnant older. We're seeing women who were able to, do assistive reproductive technology using IVF to get pregnant. And, those women also had comorbidities that are affecting their overall health as well. So addressing a number of those things can help us reduce the numbers that are unfortunately too high.
Okay. Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die compared to white women from pregnancy-related causes. Why is that?
It's a loaded question. So that is also an unfortunate statistic. You address the social determinants of health, which will affect any woman and their, their health as it relates to pregnancy. I won't even address that because that's something that goes for all races. For Black women specifically, and again, it's kind of embarrassing to say, but a lot of it has to just do with cultural competency and how comfortable a woman feels with her provider. Because a lot of the time, even when we address access to care, the usability of care is still not where it should be. So women who don't come in for appointments because they just don't like their doctor, don't feel comfortable with the provider that's giving them care. And I've had patients who tell me that they tell me things that they wouldn't have told a provider that they've seen in the past. So a lot of the times and they don't follow the instructions of someone that they don't trust. So when we age match, or when we match and control for age, match and control for education, match and control for all of those different factors that relate to the social determinants of health, all we're left with is how equitable the care is just based on how the provider treats the patient and how much confidence the patient has in their provider.
So how can we make maternal health better for the Black community?
I think just addressing that one thing not the one thing, but I think is a huge role is just the relationship between the patient and provider. One, we have to diversify the workforce so that there are patients who feel comfortable with providers who look like them, and there are patients who feel comfortable with providers who don't look like them as well. But I think that's a huge part of it. And then just encouraging the people in the Black community to improve the things that they can. So those, the learned parts and the parts that we can control, for improving their health literacy, so that they know what things are available to them, and empowering them to advocate for their best care.
Okay. So can you talk a little bit about the Black maternity health money bus that was introduced to address the maternal health crisis in America?
Yeah, so the omnibus legislation, it was introduced by 2 representatives from the House of Representatives and actually Senator Harris, specifically to address the maternal mortality crisis as it relates to Black women. So it is a piece of legislation that is comprised of 9 different bills to address the multifaceted nature of the crisis. So one bill specifically, I'd have to look at it to know them, just to list all of them, but one is specifically addressing the care that pregnant veterans receive. One addresses the care that incarcerated persons receive. One bill addresses improving transportation, nutrition, and things of that nature, specifically for women of color. Another one addresses, I think housing is also addressed in that same bill. Another bill talks about diversifying the workforce as well, so trying to get more people who are underrepresented in the healthcare workforce. Let me see if I can find different. Oh, data collection, because the American College of OBGYN has tried to work, and the CDC has tried to work on collecting data about maternal death, just so that we can understand why it's happening and what things could be improved. So they're working on that as well. Maternal health, which I think one of our public health people said they're working on now, mental health for women as well. So they're trying to address that, especially substance use disorders, which is a huge thing. And then another one of the bills addressed specifically trying to incentivize making coverage better for women so that they can be able to get care.
Alicia, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, so the social determinants of health really affect one's health and outcomes in life, but it's also tied to us voting. What's her name? Lauren Underwood, she's a nurse, also a representative from Illinois, who was instrumental in introducing this act to the Congress. And even though it was introduced back in March, movement as far as getting it passed has not really been happening as yet. And so it's important for us to be more involved in the political process. You know, voting is one way where we get to voice our opinions and our concerns. We choose our representatives, we choose our senators, we choose our president. Why is it that we as a people, in your opinions, we don't vote? We don't get out there so that bills like these get passed?
Okay. So I'll pose this question to you, Layla. How does health affect voting, and how does voting affect health?
Okay, so twofold, and mind the music in the back because I have a 2-year-old. Um, so when it comes to like voting and health, I think the biggest issue is just that we're not holding people accountable who make decisions. And a lot of that has to do with like your local elections. And so because if you look at the media, a lot of emphasis is placed on the presidential election. People fail to realize how much impact the local elections have. So like your attorney generals, the people in your House of Reps, and they make these critical decisions that happens in your community directly. And I think a lot of people aren't aware, and that's because there's not a lot of emphasis on it. And some of that has to do with just like not only just media, but media has become very segmented. So whereas back in the days you had very few channels, so at some point the news about your local elections would pop up because you only got like 5 channels. And now with media being segmented, you can sit there and watch HGTV all day and not see anything about the news. So it's not top of mind for most folks. And just I think a lot of times in the Black community, we're just not aware. Thank you, baby. We're just not aware of the impact of our local elections, and it's not really talked about. But the people who do vote in these local elections happen to be predominantly white or wealthy or other ethnic groups who understand the power of voting and the power of your local elections. And I think that's where some of the disparity comes from when it comes to health. Some of it is also segmented in racial biases, and that's another topic we'll get into. Like as far as voting, I think there's just a lack of awareness of his local elections. Like people don't even go to their community boards. And you look at the disparity between like liquor stores, they have to get approved to be in your community. That's a license, and they have to be approved by the community to be there. And people don't go. They don't know, so automatically they're granted. But if you look at like a predominantly white neighborhood, you're not going to see so many liquor stores or chicken spots everywhere because they'll say no, and they won't grant them access to be there. And so there's this thing with home ownership. As far as in the Black community, a lot of us are renters, and we talk about affordable housing versus owning a home and being able to have more space in the community. And then when we do have homeowners, they're not showing up because they're not aware that this is important for them to go to.
When I was preparing for this podcast, I was reading an article. I can't remember where the article came from, but one thing that stood out was the fact that one's health can affect them voting. So people who are suffering from like chronic illnesses might not turn out to vote. You know what I mean? So do you want to talk about health and voting?
Sure. Some of the things that we look at as a community in terms of how we vote and how our health affects our voting is it goes back to a little bit of what Layla said a second ago. Are we picking our representatives to represent us and how we feel with regards to our health? You know, you look at Flint, basically, and what's been going on in Flint for the past 7, 8, 10 years. The people that are representing Flint or Michigan on a whole are not representative of Flint itself, is it? You have what happened in Flint could have been avoided had people gone out to their local, governments, had people go out and paid attention to who are representing them and vote for their, for what they want or what they think is representative of them. We go back to Layla and I were talking about something similar last night with regards to, are you looking at Is it ignorance in our community, knowing the importance of voting? Is it that we do not know? We only show up on every 4 years when it's time to vote for a president. Um, Chances are we show up to vote for a senator or for a representative of the House, but we're not really focused on the things that really affects us in our community. Who are the ones that are making these decisions? And so that affects our health. Are we going out voting for a governor who is supposed to expand Medicaid so that we can get the benefits of the Affordable Care Act? But our governor is not, because he's Republican and he chose to play politics, and that is affecting our community. So those are that's one of the main things that's affecting us in terms of our health. Because the only decision we have to make is to exercise our vote. The ones that make the decisions are the ones that we put into power, and we're not going out there exercising that. And one of the points that I made last night was that the Black community, majority of them, would stand up after the Obama tenure and said, hey, he didn't do nothing for the Black community, not knowing that Obama himself needed help from others in order for him to do stuff for us. Obama lost the Senate 2 years after he got into office. And then he literally was like a lame duck the entire time. So what are we doing to help him? Are we getting people out of the office who's not supposed to be there, locally, state, and federal? Or are we just sitting down waiting to vote every 4 years?
Andre, do you have to
Yeah,
add?
just to add to what Rome said, I think sometimes when we think about health, we more think about the physical aspect and the medical aspect of how we're affected. We're not connecting how we vote to individuals who are put into place to put systems in place that would end up benefiting us. If you take, for example, low income, people in low income areas don't have the same access to healthy options as opposed to more affluent communities. So when someone doesn't go out and vote, we're not trying to align those aspects together. To the people who we put in place will put those systems in place, which can end up benefiting us in the long term.
Okay. All right, so I'll pose this question to you, Kendra. Why is voting important?
Wow. So I think that, well, one, voting is important for everything. Is it Rohan?
Romaine.
Romaine, sorry. Everything that he was saying, it directly impacts everything that influences us. Of course, I'm looking at it right now from a health perspective, but the expansion of Medicaid, determining where, when people are going to be covered based on their federal poverty, where they meet on the federal poverty line, all of those things are affected by the people who actually take our issues to the court and take them to the floor and help make those decisions. And I think people don't understand that because of the ignorance. They just look at it as the president to them is not necessarily someone that they can relate to. Even if it's someone that looks and thinks like them, they feel like that person is so far removed that it doesn't matter who's in office. But what they don't realize is how that trickles down. That person is the one who chooses who their staff is, who they put into different offices. And voting is so much more than even voting for the president. You are responsible for putting in officials at your level who make some of those pertinent decisions for you. And so people really don't understand how that impacts them directly, impacts their individual everyday life based on who they're voting for, not just the every 4 years. When they look at your ballot, it's not just the president. There are several other people on that ballot that you need to vote for. And I think that's why voting is important. And I think that we need to, particularly in our community, try and educate people on understanding all of that.
Yeah, to piggyback on what you were saying, voting is extremely important for those reasons. A lot of people are not privy to the education as to why it's important. It's not discussed enough in schools. It's not discussed enough on television. We're so focused on the presidential election. We don't hear about other legislatures that's been put out there that we're going to be voting on during the general election. So it's up to us as a community to educate ourselves, know what the process is like, hold our elected leaders accountable. For like the Omnibus Act, call up our legislators, call up our representatives, and get them going to get stuff like that passed. And another piece that's important is the census. The president wants us to no longer conduct the census how it should, and that determines how much money is allocated to the local jurisdictions. It determines how much funding gets to our healthcare, to schools, to like basically everything. To us as a community to educate ourselves, know what the process is like, hold our elected leaders accountable. For like the Omnibus Act, call up our legislators, call up our representatives, and get them going to get stuff like that passed. And another piece that's important is the census. The president wants us to no longer conduct the census how it should, and that determines how much money is allocated to the local jurisdictions. It determines how much funding gets to our healthcare, to schools, to like basically everything.
Yes. So when it comes to why voting is important, there's so many things that we could touch on. To it coming from a lack of education as to why we vote, but the one of the pressing aspects of voting are not and people not going out and vote is that you don't vote, you don't get a representative, you don't get to be represented. Meaning, when you put someone in office, you're not just putting that name in office, you're putting everyone that he or she hires to go with him. So you're putting a Stephen Miller in office, that a Stephen Miller is going to come and give all his radical immigration policies that makes America seem like, we're going all the way back in the day. Um, so you're putting their views and their, radical beliefs in office that's going to be spilled down on the communities. Um, when you take, for instance, we look at just a couple examples here, the Freddie Gray matter, what happened in Baltimore. We have an attorney general here, and we voted for a mayor who decided that they were going to bring charges against the cops in the Freddie Gray case. Had we had someone who we felt that was accountable to the people, we still to this day are not sure why those guys weren't charged, or they were charged, but they got off on technicalities. When the reason why they got off is because the charges that these guys brought on the cops involved in the Freddie Gray case was in no way, shape, or form going to get them found guilty. And the reason for that is they were charged with first-degree murder, right? And for you to charge someone with first-degree murder, you have to prove that that person got up in the morning with the intention of killing Freddie Gray, right? These cops were on their job. They didn't have the intention to kill him when they woke up, but they had the intention to do so once they were with him. So it wasn't first-degree murder. It was manslaughter, second-degree murder. You know what I mean? Something else that would have passed the eye test. And that's the reason why they got off on technicalities. You vote for your attorney general. Same thing happened in Kentucky with Breonna Taylor. This attorney general was speaking at the RNC 2 weeks before he brought a case to the grand jury. People voted for these people, right? And so they bring a case to the grand jury just so that the crowd can say, hey, we get to charge him. No, because now people are no longer protesting and upset. Oh, I'm just going to give you this piece of pie so you can live with it, and I can say that I gave you what you wanted. But we need to be educated about these matters. We need to go out and pick people we know are going to be representing us, and someone is not going to be sleeping in bed with the enemies.
So Leila, let me ask you this. What does voting mean to you?
Voting to me is taking my responsibility to be active in what impacts my community. So being straight up African American, my ancestors died for us to vote and exercise this responsibility to vote. So it's just like, for me, it's not a choice. You know what I mean? The amount of people in the past that struggled and fought so they can actively participate. Because currently we have the same folks in power and positions that have been there for years. If you look at your government, whether it's local or federal, it's predominantly old white men, right? They've been there for years. If you look at like your Senate, your House of Reps, these are positions that are like elected every 2 years, but it's unlimited. It's not like the president where they have term limits. And so they've been there continuously. Typically, the incumbent always wins, for the most part, because either they're not getting challenged directly by anybody or people are just not showing up to vote. So like it's super important. So I have a child and I have another child on the way. Things that impact not only myself but them in the future are determined by older folks who have an older way of thinking. You got to think about like the 60s racism was, I mean, granted it still occurs, but it was cool, it was legal, like it was the norm, you know. And you still have those people from that time that are still in positions of power. We're looking at Roe versus Wade being able to be turned around because of what's the next person that's been appointed. And when you look at like these type of decisions, these are people who are going to be in place for a long time. Like a Supreme Court judge, that's a lifetime appointment. So you got to think about the impact, not only for right now, but the future. And like I said, you have a bunch of old people in there. Not even that it's just old white males, but you have old people, and we need more of the youth. We need younger folks because they're determining our future, not theirs. They're going to be long gone by the time that these, you know, decisions and policies roll out to have an impact. They're going to be gone, but it's going to be impacting us and our children and our grandchildren. So it's literally our duty to do that. And it's, you know, my parents would be rolling over their grave if I didn't exercise. So it just
Mhm.
means a lot for me.
Andre, why is this election so important?
Well, this election is important because currently, as we see, America is a bit divided at this point. There are multiple issues at hand. For one, the COVID situation that has not yet been handled. Second of all, we have the ACA, which is impacting a whole bunch of people, which they want to cut out. There are about 20 something million people benefiting from the ACA. If that get if that is cut out, there are a whole bunch of people without health insurance. They'll be impacted by many situations that are unable to pay for their health. And in addition, the unemployment um, rates are skyrocketing. So currently, I believe, being that we're so divisive, we need someone to come in that will kind of unite everything together. So that's why I believe this election is very important.
Alicia, what about you?
Voting is important to me for all the above reasons that everyone else mentioned. You know, it directly ties into my everyday life. You know, it ties into my economic stability. It ties into my healthcare. It ties into my education. It ties into my future. A lot of people fail to also realize that just because we elect someone to be president for 4 years doesn't mean that whatever policies they undercut or they implement doesn't go into effect now. It affects future generations. Obama put in the Affordable Care Act back in 2011, 12, 10, somewhere around there. And now, 8 years later, it's on the verge of being completely eradicated with no plans to replace it at all. So we're going back, not even to square one, but like we're going really far back. You know, Medicaid and Medicare was implemented as part of the New Deal. And we haven't had any major medical legislation like this in what, 50 plus years, you know? So it affects me, for someone who's a healthcare provider, someone who wants to help the underserved in my community. It affects them because not everyone is privileged with the knowledge and education that I have. So I'm responsible for helping to convey those messages to people, to help them to understand these are your options. These are the resources available to you. But if those resources are no longer intact, my hands are tied. So it's my voice I need to vote.
And Kendra, I want to pose this question to you. With the impending election, what is the outcome that we all hope for as Black people living in America?
I think we have to look back at our history and see where we're coming from. And there have been some improvements in our community, but there's so much more to even put us on an equal playing ground or fair playing ground with with the other races. And I think in making the decisions that we do when we're voting, it's who is going to help us continue to project forward. I mean, we have an unfair starting point just based on a number of different things, but just the color of our skin alone. And so we need people in office who are going to help propel us forward or to continue to move in that direction. Because I will say we have improved, but just like we were talking about before, these people who are in office were around when racism and things that were racist were legal. And that was in the 1960s. We're talking about 50 years ago. This is not like 100, 200, 300 years ago. This was just the other day. So there's so many things that are so many deep rooted thoughts and mindsets that need to be eradicated. And that's not going to happen unless we have people leading and moving forward to represent us on that front, and to be able to champion that change needs to continue to happen.
And I think your point ties in with what Layla was saying before, that we need to get the youth involved and we need to get the youth in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people don't realize how much power we have. I mean, I've gone on the Hill in a group of people and gone to the offices of representatives, gone to the offices of senators to talk to them specifically about the things related to maternal health. But anyone can walk in there and make an appointment and talk to them and say things. Anyone can write a bill. Any civilian can write a bill and try to get it passed for legislation, can write legislation. So people don't realize how much power that we have. But yes, we all do have jobs that don't afford us the time to do things like that. And that is why voting is important, because even though we might have the desire to do those things that we know need to happen to affect change, we don't have the time to do it. So it's important for us to bring people into office who can stand for what we know needs to happen.
And Rome, what do you think?
The best outcome we could have as Black people is get rid of Mitch McConnell. That's another conversation. No, but seriously, if the best outcome for this election is it might be too late now, but we need to, moving forward, we need to get more representatives that look like us. And those representatives needs to come from our community.
Mm-hmm.
Lindsey Graham said in the Amy Corbett in the Justice airing the other day that something about going back to the good old days of Jim Crow, and he said it in jest, but we know it's not in jest, right? So we need to, gone were the days of we have representatives, one or two that were from the MLK movement, and they're sitting there saying, "You're my best friend. Oh, I will never disrespect you. You're my best friend." Back in, when they're having the airings, we need to get people who are willing to fight for us, more like the Ocasio-Cortez type of people who are willing to put people to task. You know what I mean? So the best outcome for Black people in this election is, of course, to not only for Democrats to win, but for Democrats to win significantly. We need to defeat, if we're going to defeat a movement, we need to do it in a way that they know we don't want this to resurface. You know what I mean? And then moving forward, one of the things that we do need is to make sure that we hold people to their promises, right? You talk about healthcare, you talk about what's going to happen. Right now, they're in court, right? Fighting against pre-existing conditions, right? We need to make sure we stand firm on the ACA and build on the ACA, right? We need to make sure that we educate people, and so that people could stop voting against their own wills. Yeah, people are voting against their own interests every day. If you're a woman right now in this country, I do not understand why you're voting for a Republican. It does not make sense. If you're a woman in this country who goes through all the things that we've been talking about in terms of maternal health, when you need Planned Parenthood type stuff, every woman needs at some point in your life, how you vote for a Republican has to be ignorance. And so deep-rooted religious beliefs that some pastor plagued into you from you were like 4 years old, and you have no idea or reasoning to get past that to say, this is against my interest. You know what I mean? How are you against Roe versus Wade and I'm still voting for you when my sister, you might not be going through it as an individual, but your sisters or your friends how people were affected by that. You know what I mean? Men who has never, who you tell them today to wear a mask and they said, no, that's going against my freedom. But it's okay for them to tell a woman that they shouldn't have an abortion or that whatever they should do with their bodies. It's absolutely amazing to me. So we need to start educating our people and educating the community that, hey, listen, stop voting against your own interest. Look at the ballots. I was telling them the other day, I hate to go on, but you don't go on to vote and just look at a top ticket and not research everything on the ballot. Go and look at everything that Maryland is putting on the ballot. That question about the casinos that are coming in, more gambling online, is that going to be beneficial to schools in Baltimore City? Where is that money going? Look at that and make your vote count. That's it.
Those are some good points. So anyone can answer this, but how do we get people to vote? How do we accomplish that?
By making a podcast that explains why it's important.
Good
Yeah.
point.
Educating, taking the time to talk to our brothers and sisters, our neighbors. Even if you're not a citizen, that doesn't mean that you can't educate yourself and press people to go out and exercise their vote that many died and fought for us to have. In this country, we weren't considered human. We were considered 3/5 of a person. And then we were allowed, given the right to vote. And then you had to pass all these laws, these tests, just to be able to give the right to vote. Now they're asking for different voter IDs and all these other stuff, clearing the rolls so that people cannot exercise their God-given rights given by the Constitution. So getting out there, knocking on doors, talking about it in churches, talking about it in schools, talking about it at work. It's not about politics. It's not about whether you're Republican, you're Democratic, if you're a Green Party, Tea Party, or what other affiliation you're with. It's about exercising your right to vote. Make your choice. You should have the right to choose whether you have an abortion or not. You should have the right to choose to get health insurance. You should be able to have health insurance, access to health care. You could be born with stuff that you had no control over, but that's a pre-existing condition. Spina bifida or any type of heart conditions you're born with. Now you're not qualified to have insurance and you're only a kid. That's messed up. So educating ourselves and, having town hall style community meetings so that people will understand that together we do have a choice. Together we are stronger, and people are afraid of our power when we join forces, which is why, so many attacks on the Black community have been happening over the years. But don't let that deter you from going to the polls. There are different ways to vote this election. You can vote, there are drive-through ballots, drop-off stations, early voting. We're not saying that you have to go on election day. You can go anytime beforehand, wear a mask, wash your hands, and exercise due diligence.
Andre, do you have anything to add?
I was just about to add to what Alicia, I believe your name is, that we can educate the public just to let them know that it's not just about the presidential portion of the election. It's the locals and so forth. Also, one other medium that I believe that could be used for getting people to vote is through social media. I've been seeing it being pushed heavily through social media. The Shade Room is pushing, encouraging people to vote. Yeah, that's another way we can get people to vote, pushing the message.
Yeah, Instagram has been heavily promoting voting as well. Anytime you post anything related to politics, or even just going on your feed, you'll see tabs prompting you to register and to get your ballot, etc.
And also, we, as the educated mass in our community, need to, get involved. We need to encourage people to subscribe to their congressman's mailing email chain so they'll know when congressman is coming home and having a town hall somewhere, because they do that. They have to do that. They have to reach out to the people. Too often, though, we see, town halls and there's no representative of Black people there asking the tough questions that are responsible for our community. We need to encourage people to get involved in the voting process, get involved in campaigns, go out and if you have the time, knock on doors, reach out to people, encourage your neighbors, as you said earlier, but be involved in the process itself will not only help educate you, but educate others that look like you to start going on and make those decisions that affects our community.
Mm-hmm.
I think
And
the biggest
like,
thing is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, sorry. I was just going to say, someone had mentioned about diversity. Representation matters. So we need to see more Black and Brown Asian faces out there. We need to have our representatives look like us. The minorities are the majority. So it's important for us to um, talk to our representatives. They represent us. We put them there to get our voices, our agenda pushed through, not the other way around.
I think the biggest thing that we need to do is understand the skepticism by the Black community onto why they don't vote, and then addressing that. Like, I think just saying, like, yes, you need to vote. There's like, we used to vote in large numbers. There's a reason why we stopped. And so if we address that first and addressing and connecting to them to realize, okay, voting is not just the presidential, but it's connected to X, Y, and Z. And I think promoting that more so in the media, like you get to vote on this and educating people on what it is they're exactly voting on. Because I don't think that's what's happening. It's just like, get out there and vote. But there's a lack of like, what exactly are you voting on? Or what exactly are the issues that you get the opportunity to vote on? So like, for instance, on the ballot, there's referendums. You literally can vote on like a legislation straight off the ballot, like not a representative, but literally legislation. And I don't think people understand that. And I think even when you do get a ballot, it can be a little bit confusing if there's not one site that has all the information about these different like politicians or people that are on there. Like I know when I did vote, like I have to spend probably like 30 minutes on each question trying to research who these people are and like what policies they stand for. So I think right now you just see vote, 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 but like what exactly are people voting for? And I think addressing the skepticism in the community, like you have to understand your audience and you have to address why they're not voting in the first place. Yes, they only see that as presidential, but two, they're not aware of what issues are on there. And then two, where do they go to gather that information? So if we can use social media to highlight like vote for this election or every 2 years this is happening, like this year you get to vote on your senator. Like we only have that emphasis when it's like the presidential election, like right now, but we have to keep that momentum going. But we really need to understand our audience because it's easy to be from a place of privilege because we're all educated to be like, this is, related to X, Y, and Z. You got to understand where people are coming from. And, I speak because I come from the hood, I come from a low income community. So it's like I have to see where people are at, meet them where they're at, and actually explain and, speak in terms that they can understand. Because if you look at Republicans and ignorant white masses, the reason why they go around with stuff is because people are speaking in a language that they can understand and that they can follow. Like it's all about influencing. And I think we need to start doing something similar where we can speak to our audience and help them understand in a way that they can digest. Because you can't keep speaking in terms that they're not going to understand. Like I can go home and be like, I'm an engineer. My friends are like, yo, that's cool. They don't know what it is, but they're like, yo, that's cool. I'm happy for you. You have to like break it down and speak in a language that people understand. So it's easy for us to have a podcast and speak in these high terms, but we got to break it down so folks who are not educated and are not privileged can really understand the power that they have. And I think that's kind of where we need to be at.
You touched on the last question that I have, Layla, which is what do we say to people who are choosing not to vote?
Yes,
So the thing is telling people that are choosing not to vote, I probably would want to ask why, and then based off of the reason why, hit those different points as far as like counterpoints. Like I think we got to stop being super defensive and understand where people are coming from. So like folks who are not voting, why? Do you feel like because there's no change? Okay, well, let's see what's going on in the last couple of years, the policies that actually impacted you and who made those decisions. Was it actually the president or was it your local folks? And then when we get to that conversation, I think that's like hey, this is what exactly impact you. Like that attorney general or the superintendent, for instance, COVID. The people who decide what schools open, that's your superintendent. Those are voted positions. So like the people who decide like, oh, your school's gonna open and then there's an outbreak, that was somebody that you voted for. That's not the president.
Mm-hmm.
So do you want that to happen again, or do you want other people to make decisions for you? And I think that's the thing. Like everybody wants to have control and wants to have power. As a child, you hate when your parents are always telling you what to do. Do you want to continue to live as a child, or do you want to be an adult and take responsibility for the future and for your present?
And I think if I can just add one thing, I think being prepared to have uncomfortable conversations with people as well. Just, I don't know you guys, well, I know Alicia's background, but I grew up in a religious community. And some people are one issue voters. Like some people just, they're pro-life and that's it. It doesn't matter who's going to push that for them. That's all they want to know, and that's how they're going to vote. But when you have to explain to them, like banning Planned Parenthood, which is a huge in for people just for getting preventative care. Planned Parenthood is barely about abortions. I mean, they write for people to do so many things to take care of their care beforehand. And you're telling me pro-life, but you're banning people's access to contraception. And when those people do get pregnant, you're passing legislation that's not going to help them take care of those kids. Is that really pro-life? But those are just some of the what I consider uncomfortable conversations. It's easy to just encourage people, yeah, we need to go vote, this is why. People who are of the same mindset as you, so it makes the conversation easy. But there are a lot of uncomfortable conversations that you have to have with people to make them understand why their mindset is not where it should be.
Does anyone else have anything to add to that last point?
I don't know. I've struggled with this question for a while, myself personally, because at one point, I could not understand why people would not go out and vote, and that's just for me being the overthinker of certain things that I am. I just couldn't understand why people wouldn't go out and vote. But as Layla said, and as the doctor just said, it's having those conversations and not using it as an opportunity to belittle people, but doing your best to understand their reasoning behind it. um, Finding that medium. As I said, we have a lot of times where people go out and vote against their own interests, but at least they have a reason to vote. Why is it that one particular individual does not want to go out and vote? Is it that you do not know the power of your vote? Is it that you do not know that your vote has meaning? There's a lot of people go out and say, why would I vote? My vote's not going to count. You know, one of the reasons why Hillary Clinton lost in 2016 election. I know we all still have heartaches from that election, but one of the reasons why she lost is that the TV channels where every mainstream media was saying she had already had it in the bag. So a lot of people sat home and be like, I don't have to vote because there's no way she's going to lose. Turns out, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, all of them, she lost by less than 3 points in all three of those states, which were the key states. So this is exactly. So people need to know that their vote counts. There are elections out here that are won by 1, 2, 3 votes. There are elections out here that are won by a couple hundred votes. So having that understanding that there's a reason why Republicans try so hard to stop you from voting. There's a reason why the governor is putting in Texas one box in each county to receive mail-in votes, because each vote counts. And if they can restrict as much as they can, their chances of winning increases significantly. So getting that power back to the people and letting them know that, listen, you have it in your arms, in your hands to do this. And I think that's the best way we can do it.
One other thing is that we have the opportunity for our voices to be heard. Why wouldn't we want to use the opportunity to voice our concerns? And another thing is to let people know that it's more than just a political stance. There's a whole bunch of other factors that are connected to voting. And I believe if we highlight that, that will be, or that could be an opportunity to get more people to vote.
even just holding people, making sure that we know that we need to hold people accountable. Because Dems are Republicans, regardless, we've been screwed by both parties. And I can see why people have skepticism about voting in general. But I think people need to know, like, we have to hold these elective officials accountable. And so that means if you have a term and you're not voting in our best interest, that you get pulled out. And I think that's the other thing. We do have like an undying loyalty to certain parties and we don't hold them accountable. And that's the biggest issue. But like I said, again, just addressing people's skepticism, because I remember COVID came out and people are like, no, this is a scam by the government. And I had folks, first like attack them and belittle. I'm like, no, you got to understand the history in this country. There's a distrust in the government, and that is valid. Like, people are valid to be distrustful of this government, and I can understand their ignorance. And then addressing that, I would say, hey, COVID wasn't just a US thing, it was international before it hit here. And if you look at international news, then you can be like, oh, this is not just the government. And that's how I start to speak to people who have different views, but definitely understanding where people are coming from and addressing that skepticism. Because I think right now with our cancel culture, the minute someone has opposing views, we want to cancel the whole conversation and not have that conversation. And we don't have any better outcomes than what we started with. And I think the biggest thing is just making sure we have difficult conversations and we actually address people's perspectives, because everybody's perspective is valid. There's a reason for that, but understanding why and speaking to it, I think that's the most important part. And so, like, if anything, getting people to vote, let's have conversations about voting and stop just saying blindly, like, vote, get out there and vote. Like, let's have conversations about it so people really understand the necessity and they can feel it in themselves, the need to go out there and vote. Because if you can't connect with them, half of them not going to vote, or they're going to vote and still not hold people accountable, or we're going to have the similar outcomes that we already have.
Right. And I will say I was guilty myself of just falling into that, hearing the generations above you and years, the people who have been telling you for years, this is how you need to vote, this is what's in your best interest, without even really thinking for myself. And I intentionally follow people on social media who are on the other side, who are like stark champions for Trump, Black people who vote for Trump, just to understand how they think. Because it's, like I said, it's easy for you to talk to the people who have similar thought processes as you do. It's easy to talk to them, but trying to talk to the people who we need to flip, you're not going to be able to understand them and meet them where they are if you're only surrounding yourself with the information with people who agree with you. There's no way, it's impossible. You can't speak to them on their level unless you go into their camp. So I follow them intentionally and listen to them and try to understand what their perspectives are, just to have an intelligent conversation with other people about it.
I agree. I understand why people vote for Trump. There are a lot of people here who want to shake things up. They don't like what's going on in the country. And Trump is a known negotiator. He's a known get things done. You're fired. He doesn't care about what people think about him. So I understand that. But, again, it goes back to voting for your own interest and holding people accountable. So because you want to shake things up, you don't like what's been going on so long, we need to do things in order to change that. And that means getting more involved in the process, understanding how people are elected. There's a difference between the presidential elections and every other elected official. For the presidential elections, there's the electoral college that plays a huge role in determining who wins. You remember the 2004 Al Gore versus Bush, it was, and Al Gore, he won the popular vote, but Bush won the electoral college, which holds a stronger pull over choosing who wins the presidential role. So we need to educate, we need to understand, like Layla was saying, why people don't get out there. Why is there such a distrust? And we need to find creative ways just to get people to stop being loyalists and vote for their interests rather than opposed to their personal interests.
And does anyone want to add anything else before we close out? No? Okay. So I just definitely want to thank everyone for coming in. I know that for the last hour, you guys could have been doing something else. So I just want to say that I appreciate you guys taking the time to talk to us. And I hope that when people hear this podcast, it would educate them, it would influence them, and get people voting.
Thank you
So
for
that was the
listening
goal
to
of today's
today's
podcast.
Life as We Know It podcast. Remember, life is what you make it, so be sure to live it fully every day. Also, if you'd like to hear more of our topics or stay up to date with us, go ahead and subscribe to our channel and get notified each time a new video is added. Talk to you next time.